Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Good afternoon. This is Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the State Republican Party and the County Chair of Suffolk Republican Party. And with us once again is our favorite guest, Eric Levine, noted lawyer, essayist, political commentator. And I want to announce for the record today, let the record show that the name of the show forever after is Let the Record Show, because our audience is so big and our ratings are so high that they decided to broaden the name. So it's now Let the Record Show. But the good news is you get to keep Jesse Garcia and me, and it's the same kinds of topics that we've been talking about: international, national, state, and local. And we will not give short shrift, I promise you, to Long Island, the home of Chairman Garcia and myself.
Hey, I was born there.
And Eric was born there, too. So this is what was formerly known as the Rockstar, the Long Island Report, now known as Let the Record Show. So welcome to the inaugural of Let the Record Show. I want to begin by saying we're going to have a guest in about 15 minutes or so. Dr. James Hanley of the Empire Center, who's going to be talking about what's going on in Albany with respect to Green New Deal and legislation that's passed there, and whether it's workable, feasible, economically justifiable, and its impacts on consumers. So I look forward to having Dr. Hanley on the show with us in a little while. But I want to begin by talking about the Trump investigations and what they mean for America's future. Now, you not only have the indictment of Mr. Trump on a 34-count indictment in Manhattan, but you also have investigations going on before a grand jury in Georgia, and you also have investigations by Jack Smith, a special prosecutor appointed by the Attorney General of the United States, supposedly looking at January 6th, as well as document retention by President Trump. Now, when I ask the question, what do they mean for America's future, this is what I'm getting at. I'm not talking about the very specific allegations or scope investigations, as much as what does it mean for America that we've now weaponized the criminal justice system, where a local prosecutor can go after a former president of the United States to try to marginalize him and to remove him from the playing field when he is a leading candidate for his party's nomination, as well as a leading candidate for the November election. I think it's very, very problematic, and I'm very concerned about that. Similarly, I don't know Jack Smith at all, but I do have a real problem with his appointment by Attorney General Merrick Garland, who has not distinguished himself in his tenure as Attorney General of the United States, notwithstanding his great record as a Court of Appeals judge in the D.C. Circuit. But he has not distinguished himself at all in terms of independence from the Biden White House. So let me begin with you, Eric. What do you say about this?
Well, first, I think we have to make a distinction between the case that was brought by Alvin Bragg in New York and the other three cases that you mentioned, one in Georgia, the Mar-a-Lago documents, and the January 6th investigation. We know it's in the Alvin Bragg indictment. We don't know yet what's going on with the Georgia voting fraud allegations, the Mar-a-Lago documents, and the January 6th. We may believe that there's something untoward regarding the appointments of these folks, but there may really be a there. I'm from the view that it's hard to watch January 6th and to say that nothing wrong happened, that this was a justifiable form of protest. You know, showing up in the ellipse and speaking your mind and then going home is absolutely protected speech, First Amendment speech, President was entitled and permitted to bring folks down there. And it's an open question as to what degree, if any, he incited the crowd to go storm the Capitol. That needs to be looked into and to be addressed. But what we do know for a fact is that while the rioters were inside the Capitol and chanting "Hang Mike Pence," and he was getting desperate calls from members of the House of both parties, he sat there and did nothing. So I don't think we should be giving Donald Trump a pass on January 6th in any way, shape, or form. I happen to think it was a disqualifying act for him being president, whether or not it was a criminal act that needs to be looked into. Similarly with the Mar-a-Lago documents. Now, I think a very strong argument could be made that since Hillary Clinton was given a pass on having secret documents on her laptop, and even more than that, after subpoenas were issued, she was destroying evidence. Those are clearly crimes, and she wasn't prosecuted. So it's great to say no one's above the law, but it's also more important that everybody be treated equally. So if you're giving Hillary Clinton a pass, I agree you can look suspiciously at the investigation into Mar-a-Lago and the documents there, but we don't know everything yet. One of the amazing things about criminal investigations that we should keep in mind is that the general public sees tiles of a mosaic. You see one tile here, one tile there. Only the prosecutor sees the entire mosaic, sees all the tiles. And at some point, they'll have to reveal it if they want to indict him and accuse him of a crime. When you come to Bragg, the indictment in New York is an obscenity. It clearly is weaponization of the criminal justice system. He has a statute of limitations problem. He's accused him of a crime, but he hasn't identified what the crime is. There's a very high likelihood that the court is going to dismiss that case before it ever gets to trial. So for me, the most important issue is, what is it doing to our institutions? I think this gets back to your original question. One of the things that distinguishes the United States from all other countries in the world is our institutions. The separation of powers, the judiciary, the legislative branch, the executive branch. And those institutions make us a country of laws, not a country of individuals. And when you keep abusing those institutions, those things that stand between us and chaos, eventually they fray. And at some point, they're going to break. And, so Donald Trump on January 6th, I think, strained our institutions. Alvin Bragg, by weaponizing the criminal justice system, is straining our institutions. And he's doing it to advance a particular political cause. And it may well be he's advancing his own political agenda, because he's now the hero of the progressive left. But it also, if you really want to be cynical about it, what's the best way to help nominate Donald Trump to become president? Accuse him of this crime, because as we are seeing, it is rallying his base. It is making people sympathetic to Trump because these charges are so outrageous. And it increases the likelihood that Donald Trump becomes the Republican nominee for president, which is what the Democrats want. Donald Trump is the Democrats' secret weapon because he's a loser. He's the first president to lose the White House, the Senate, and the House in a single term. He then went to Georgia in 2020 and told Republicans to stay home, so he elected two Georgia senators, two very liberal, progressive senators, Ossoff and Warnock, and that made Chuck Schumer Senate leader. Nancy Pelosi remained House Speaker, and Joe Biden became president, and because of that, having control of all three branches, having control of the executive and legislative branch, the Democrats were able to ram a progressive agenda down our throats. Donald Trump midwifed the progressive agenda. And the Democrats are very grateful. They're so grateful they want him to be nominated again. So he helped nominate terrible candidates in 2018. The Republicans lost. We were wiped out in 2020, and this Republican wave that was supposed to occur in 2022 didn't occur. Why? Because we had Republican candidates. Every time you listen to a Democrat talk about a Republican, always listen. They're always going to have the adjective MAGA. They're always going to say MAGA Republican, no matter who the Republican is, because they know that if by tying a Republican to Trump, they win. And I think in large part, that's what's going on with Alvin Bragg. He wants Republicans to get closer to Trump so that they can associate Republicans with Trump, because he knows how toxic he is with independents and suburban women and moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans. He's the one guy they really want to run against, because Joe Biden can't beat anybody else.
Jesse, your turn.
I think the original question was about the weaponization of the judicial system. And I think that what really is at heart here is what Eric touched upon in his early part of his statement I think we've discussed it over and over again, that this is nothing more than a weaponization of the judiciary, in some cases, the political polarization of the judiciary, and the weaponization of institutions of our government, as Eric pointed out, especially that on the prosecutorial level. However, I think what we need to also focus upon is what Eric pointed out early on, is that the Democrats are not only, and the progressives are not only weaponizing the prosecutors, the law, and the judiciary. What they're doing is not applying it fairly, equally to everyone. There are different sets of rules that apply to now different parts of the constituencies. If you're Donald Trump, you're treated differently than Hillary Clinton. If you are a Republican, you're being treated differently than Democrats and the rest of the community. If you're a progressive, you're treated with, I would say, with kid gloves and such. If you speak out against their policies, their issues, and their programs, you are now the institution of the prosecution and the judiciary is used against you. I think that fundamentally, number one, weaponizing this institution of government is just wrong. It makes us a third world country. This is what Castro used to do, and I know this personally firsthand from the persecutions he did as Castro took over Cuba in a dictatorship. With my own family, but then it's how we apply the law, how prosecutors apply the law, not fairly, not evenly, not with integrity. They do it to settle political scores, to advance a political agenda, and to nullify the voices of objecting views. That is nothing more than a third world country. It is a dictatorship. And that's what's going on here. And Americans and New Yorkers need to wake up. We've seen this, and hopefully we'll talk about this a little bit later, about making the judiciary in New York now a political pawn, and we're trading back and forth now with the state legislature and the governor on appointments. This is the one dangerous part. And I will tell you, I think that we're fortunate that here on Long Island, we have Ann Donnelly and my hometown district attorney in Suffolk County, Ray Tierney, that these are two professional prosecutors that bring, the full bearings of their offices fairly, evenly, and equally to all the cases that come forward here. I mean, I know the cases of Ray Tierney are far better than I do Ann Donnelly from Nassau County, so I can speak a little bit more proficiently on that, but he has found ways around ill-fated, flawed legislation and laws, like bail reform, to keep the citizenry safe. In other parts of this, in Manhattan, we're not seeing that. In other parts of this state, we're not seeing that with prosecutors. We're not seeing that with those prosecutors. And I will tell you, I think that whether we call Donald Trump the boogeyman or where he's going to end up as a nominee, that's going to be determined in the next few months or in about a year through the primary process. The one thing that we can say is that we've seen it because it's happening now, is George Soros and his money buying prosecutors to enact this very weaponization and the unequal distribution and an unequal application of the law against citizens.
All right, we have to take a break. Kevin has given us the sign. This is Let the Record Show, the new incarnation of our show, of the Jesse Garcia, Richard Weinberg Show. Please stay tuned for more interesting conversation. When we come back, we're going to have Dr. James Hanley of the Empire Center, one of the senior analysts there, expert on environmental law, talking about what's going on in Albany and what's going on in Washington. Please stay tuned for the second segment of Let the Record Show.
Let the Record Show is on the air.
shipping Mother's Day gifts with a rapid-fire round of questions. Ready?
Yes, my gift. Can you pack it?
Yep.
Ship it?
Yes.
Guarantee it?
Of course.
Oh, send gift baskets?
For sure.
Protect electronics? Dog-proof it? Return it if they hate it?
Yes, no, and yeah.
Are you the UPS store?
Hey, we have a winner!
Visit theupsstore.com/guarantee for full details. Most locations are independently owned. Product, services, prices, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. The UPS Store. Visit a store today.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back. This is Let the Record Show with Judge Richard Weinberg. That's me, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, Eric Levine, noted lawyer and political commentator, and we're very privileged indeed to have Dr. James Hanley back from the Empire Center, senior analyst, an expert in energy and environmental issues. We've had Dr. Hanley on before. He's always enlightening and very important commentator on these issues. Dr. Hanley, welcome back. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's nice to be here today.
Well, you wrote this great column, and I want you to talk to our listeners about it. The name of your column was A Belated Reckoning as the Climate Act Costs Become Apparent. Would you please tell us what the message you were sending in that article and your view about what's going on in Albany in terms of the politics of changing the existing law?
Yeah, the consumer costs of the Climate Act have never been considered. Several members of the Climate Action Council wanted that, and Basil Sagos and Dorian Harris said no way. And now that the DEC is looking at the cost, Basil Sagos suddenly goes, oh my gosh, they could be extraordinary. And I think Hochul is, for the very first time, becoming aware of these costs. And she's in a bit of a panic because voters are going to be upset when these costs hit them in the pocketbook. And so she's trying to adjust the way we account for greenhouse gas emissions to a model that will actually it will reduce greenhouse gases less, but will bring down the cost of complying with the law.
And the costs are considerable, aren't they, Dr. Hanley?
Very considerable. I don't have exact numbers yet. I've foiled NYSERDA and the DEC to try to get their data so we can play around with it. But depending on how you count the methane emissions using the 20-year protocol or the 100-year protocol, it's almost double the count of methane emissions under the 20-year protocol, which means to get an 85% reduction, we'll have to cut a whole lot more. And the more you cut, the more it's going to cost.
Is it correct that we're the only state that uses this 20-year methodology as opposed to the 100-year methodology?
We are. The 100-year methodology was the one that was adopted in 1992 at the Kyoto Protocol, so it became the international standard. A lot of climate scientists argue that we should use a 20-year standard because if we don't, we're undercounting the effect of methane. And some others argue we should still be using the 100-year protocol because otherwise we undercount the effect of carbon, which doesn't warm as much as methane but lasts longer in the atmosphere. So for my take, it's really a matter of perspective. Are you focused on the very near term or are you focused on the very long term? And how concerned are you about the upfront cost of trying to take action? Well, and of course, consumers are very concerned about that.
As they should be, because look, these are the facts that we face in New York right now. 484,000 people have left the state of New York. in the last year or so. A couple of million have left in the last 10 years. The economic base, we're losing some of the most productive people who create the jobs and pay the revenues that provide for all the services and the charitable contributions. We're losing a strong economic base. We should be doing everything we can to maintain the economic base. It's nice to be a true believer with respect to climate and environmental impacts, but you also have to make a livable place in the other sense as well, which is economic opportunity and personal freedom. Eric?
Yeah, so this is my question. This is what I don't quite understand. I think we can all agree there's climate change, and it's an issue that needs to be addressed. That's absolutely a fact. I happen to be one of those people who thinks that it's an open question, the degree to which man contributes to it. But let's assume for a moment man contributes 100% to it. John Kerry, at the recent Paris Accords, when we passed the Paris Accord, or re-entered the Paris Accords, made the observation that if everybody does what they commit to do under the Paris Accords, it will not make an iota of difference in fighting climate change, not an iota of difference. And why is that? Because China, India, the developing world have no interest in the climate agenda. So why are we bankrupting people to achieve a goal that is not achievable? Shouldn't we be directing our attention towards mitigation, carbon capture, without making ourselves weaker abroad and poorer at home? That would be my first question. And my second question is, we already have a solution. We have two solutions. We have natural gas and nuclear energy, neither of which have a carbon footprint or a de minimis carbon footprint at most. Those things are accessible to us. We have fracking. We have nuclear energy. We can solve the problem with existing technology, and yet those are not considered green energy. I don't understand why they are not considered green energy. So I'm wondering if you can answer the question, why do you think it's so imperative for the climate believers, or people who view climate change as a religion, to foist the climate agenda on us if it'll achieve nothing? And why, if we have solutions, won't they deem those solutions green and apply them?
Dr. Hanley, what's your view?
So you're right that developing countries, and particularly right now China and India, but add in sub-Saharan Africa if it ever gets really developing economically, they are more concerned about economic growth, about giving their people a higher standard of living, and the climate concerns come a distant second at best. But I think what is going on is people here believe that if New York sets a standard as kind of proof of concept, then everybody else will follow along. That's why they're so proud to talk about our nation-leading and world-leading goals. They think others will follow our lead. I think that's very doubtful, but that's their position. On your second question, a lot of people quibble with you on the effects of natural gas. It does have climate-warming effects, although it's much, much preferable to coal. It used to be called a bridge fuel, but now that we're standing in the middle of that bridge, people want to burn it down before we've crossed it. But I fully agree with you on nuclear, and I think New York should make itself a very welcoming place for experimentation with advanced nuclear power. We shouldn't be building the traditional type of nuclear power plants where each one is a brand new design, because those always go vastly over budget. But we should be making New York a welcoming place for experimenting with small modular reactors, which will be coming online by the end of the century. And that will give us a regular source of dependable, clean, non-emitting power.
Well, I want to just talk about electric cars for a second. I mean, in concept, electric car, that's great. It doesn't burn fossil fuels. But, of course, we have to mine minerals to make the batteries, and the strip mining, it destroys the environment. And most of those fuels and most of those minerals are in places like China and Afghanistan, which places we really don't want to be doing business with. But even more to the point, assuming we are able to make these electric cars cheaply and the supply chains aren't interrupted, you have to plug them in. You have to get the electricity to charge your electric car. And most of that electricity comes from coal, doesn't it?
Well, it depends what part of the country you're in, right? In New York, most of it's going to come from natural gas. In Illinois, a large portion of it's coming from nuclear. If you're in Indiana, most of it's coming from coal.
Where's it coming in California?
In California, it's coming from a mixture of nuclear, out-of-state coal, because they don't burn coal in California, but they happily burn it in Arizona and ship it in. And some hydro. It kind of varies depending on where you are in California.
And
burning coal is part of it.
And one last final question: if oil is so awful and so evil, why do we want to import it from Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Venezuela, enemies of the United States? Why don't we just do it here, where we do it much more cleanly and create some jobs?
For the same reason that President Biden wants us to use electric vehicles but doesn't want to prove lithium mines in the United States. We want to have it both ways, and we want to foist the problems off on other people because it's out of sight, out of mind.
Jesse.
Dr. Hanley, thank you for joining us. I have just two questions. Number one, what are the projected costs? We've been hearing a bunch of numbers that the initial shock, sticker shock to consumers based on where their gas and home heating oils would be. And number two, how did this just show up? I mean, how did the DEC and Hochul not know about the costs of using the 20-year model versus the 100-year model, and it just arrived here late into the budget system?
Mm-hmm. On your second question there, it's possible the DEC knew ahead of time and was just playing politics with it, but I don't really know. It could be that they've just really been late in getting to an analysis of it. I've filed a Freedom of Information Law request from NYSERDA for any internal documents, and they told me they did not do any internal cost-benefit analysis. As I said, several members of the Climate Action Council wanted a consumer cost analysis, and Basil Sagos and Dorian Harris gave them a flat no on that. So it's possible the DEC has known all along, but it's also possible that they've just been dawdling on this and they just now started looking into it and got scared. As far as Hochul goes, I think she's just been too busy with other things to pay much attention, and this is probably the first time anybody's really made her aware of the cost, and I sent a shiver up her spine, I'm sure.
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting. From the political point of view, this is another example of Hochul being weak in the budget negotiations, because she raised the issue, and as soon as there's some pushback from the progressive wing of the Democratic caucus and the environmental religionists, she backed off right away. Jesse, what do you say about that?
She actually did. That was my third point I was going to raise, that when she announced this, she sounded the alarm on behalf of her administration. And I think it's late. And I honestly, when you're looking at these type of analysis, I mean, here in Suffolk County, I know the legislature there's a financial impact that goes with every piece of legislation, every program. How the DEC did not know or did not do a cost-benefit analysis of this model is just beyond me. And maybe it's just typical bureaucratic government here in New York State that we've seen. But it does not show a political spine or political courage. She was at one point speaking on behalf of the consumers until 3 minutes later she got pushback from the progressives, and then she collapsed immediately. This is, and Dr. Hanley, once again, what are we looking at in terms of costs for gas here, for home heating oil? What are consumers faced with if this comes to be?
Well, all I know so far, until I get more information from the DEC, is what Basil Sagos said out loud, which is a potentially 62-cent a gallon increase in the price of gas.
Wow.
And 80% increase in the price of home heating oil or natural gas.
80% increase.
So how can people afford to live in the state of New York with those kinds of costs?
Because they'll ban gas stoves. You don't have to use it.
They're leaving.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think people can afford that. And this is what has Hochul scared. There'll be tremendous political pushback once people start feeling the cost. I mean, you have to remember the benefits of fighting climate warming are going to occur way in the future. And it's mostly going to be things that don't happen, so people aren't going to really feel those effects. You don't notice a storm that never happens. But the costs are going to be felt up front, and they're going to be felt very directly, right in people's wallets. And that's a bad combination politically, to say you're going to get charged a whole lot now, but don't worry, sometime in the future you'll get some really amorphous benefits.
I think
it could be that the benefits are worthwhile, but people aren't going to feel that way politically.
I think it's important for people to remember that during both the George W. Bush administration and the Trump administration, the United States both grew its GDP and reduced its carbon footprint, all because of capitalism, entrepreneurship, and American ingenuity. If we focus on private businesses and entrepreneurship, we can find solutions to these problems. It's when you have these top-down solutions, which really it's just a government takeover of the energy sector when we run into these kinds of problems.
Well, that's very interesting because I know Dr. Hanley is an expert on these issues, but he hasn't particularly studied the latest pronouncement from the Biden administration. But as a generic topic of discussion, let me tell you, the proposed regs coming out of EPA, which will force consumers to buy electric cars. And that's what they're intended to do. It's state control of economic decision-making. You will not have freedom of choice. They're going to force you with these rules to buy an electric car, even though the polls show that the vast majority of Americans do not want to have an electric car, notwithstanding the fact that there's good evidence that electric cars, as Eric points out, were dependent on China and Afghanistan for the resources. The batteries come out of China. The lithium and the cobalt come out of that area of the world. This is very serious business. Plus, these electric cars are not necessarily safe. In salt water, they explode. And if there's a breakdown, if there's a hurricane and there's a flooding, the cars can't move. This is very, very serious stuff. And when there's an emission from a fire, there's fumes that are toxic that go into the atmosphere. And the fire department in New York City has made it very, very clear, as the chief financial officer of the state of Florida has made it clear based on the Florida experience, when you have a fire or an explosion from one of these electric cars, guess what happens? They put it out, and it takes a long time to put it out, and then it spontaneously erupts again. So these are serious threats, and yet you have the Biden administration using the EPA to make choices that should be made in a capitalist system by individuals when they decide what kind of car they want. And this is very serious. And I would say to you, Dr. Hanley.
If I could add to that,
sure.
I'd say they're also not considering the cost impact on poorer consumers.
They don't care.
Nobody, your average person simply can't afford these electric vehicles. Someday an electric vehicle secondary used car market will develop, but nobody yet knows what that's going to look like, whether that will be a good cost-effective means for poor people. So it's really a punch in the face to your average lower-income person in this country.
Well, because it's primarily driven by wealthy white coastal elitists, people who can afford the cars and don't really care if the price of their heating oil goes up because they can afford it. Who cares about flyover country between New York and San Antonio? I mean, and Los Angeles. They care about San Antonio. I apologize to Texas.
Well, Dr. Hanley, I want to thank you once again for being on our show. It's now known as Let the Record Show, but it's the same people who brought you the Long Island Report, right. Chairman Jesse Garcia and Judge Richard Weinberg, and we're privileged to have you on the show again. Please study up on the EPA regs, because I'd love to bring you back for a more exhaustive commentary on that, because I'm very concerned about the central planning by the federal government using administrative regulations to make consumer choices.
I agree with you, especially the bureaucratic regulations as opposed to proper democratically decided decisions by our legislators.
All right. This is Let the Record Show. We will be back in a minute. Thanks again, Dr. Hanley.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And we'll be back for more interesting conversation in just a moment.
Let the Record Show is on the air.
Your snacking routine can get a little dull. Time for a light and fit remix. Like a crunchy storm of graham cookies, caramel pearls, and dark chocolate, showering down into a smooth, creamy yogurt. Enjoy 3 light and fit remix varieties with craveable flavors and up to 120 calories and 10 grams of protein per 4.5-ounce serving. See remixyogurt.com.
Campfire season's back, and that means s'mores. But when you're at home treating yourself, take them over ice with Dunkin' S'mores Cold Brew Concentrate. And suddenly you're always treating yourself. The home with Dunkin' is where you want to be. Click or tap the banner to shop now.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back. This is Let the Record Show. The new name for the old Long Island Report, but you still have the good hands that brought you the Long Island Report on Let the Record Show. You have Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, our esteemed guest, Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. So let's begin by talking about, you had one more comment on this, Jesse, about the EPA, and then we'll move on to the abortion decisions that are going on and the political fiasco that's going on with respect to judges on the Court of Appeals. So start off with the EPA.
Yeah, Dr. Hanley was amazing, and I wanted to ask him a little bit more into this because he spoke about the cost of the cars, and I think Eric pointed out only coastal elitists are going to be able to afford this. But by the rules they're setting down, these rules the EPA is coming forward are not 15, 20, 30 years from now. They're 7 years from now. They want 54 to 60% of all vehicles by 2030, 7 years from now, to be electric, and 64 to 67% of them within 9 years. That's unbelievable. The other cost associated here is that for an electric car or electric vehicle, the average monthly cost is about $206 a month for insurance. That's 27% higher than a gas-powered vehicle. And the reason being is that even in minor fender benders that may occur in these electric vehicles, the damage, they can't assure that they can fix or correct the battery, so they got to dump the entire car. Now, that's amazing to me because not only is that higher costs, more the insurance companies are going to be loving this, but then when we're dumping all these batteries, we all pointed out that there's extra mining of natural resources that go on, specifically in China and whatnot, that to get these materials to build these batteries. But now we're dumping these batteries after minor fender benders. So I think that's kind of it's more of a cost to consumers on a whole level, the middle class, as opposed to.
And when the battery wears out, Jesse, the average cost for a battery replacement is about $20,000. And by the way, as Dr. Peter Mikolos has said on Katz and Cosby repeatedly, when you're an emergency responder going to an incident involving a crash with an electric car, there's a good possibility that somebody's going to be electrocuted because they're not grounded properly. That's a danger. And
I think that the big. I'm sorry.
No, I think the problem is you have these central planners, these statists who are making up this mind in this little gingerbread world that they live in without paying attention to hard realities scientifically or technologically or in terms of the economics, and they just say, thou shalt do this. Whatever happened to freedom of choice in America? Where was it written that the EPA, unelected bureaucrats carrying out an agenda, a woke agenda, get to tell us that we can't buy a gas-powered car? Where is that written?
It's a Soviet-style level of government, forcing consumers to buy and purchase items that they're not wanting to buy. And honestly, this is hurting families and helping, our enemies like China, in my opinion.
I want to switch gears. Eric, let's talk about the abortion decisions that have everybody so rattled. One came out of Texas, and one, and there's a second one dealing with the so-called abortion pill.
Right. So, the one coming out of Texas is a real head scratcher. You have an abortion pill that's been being used for around 20 years. As I understand it, it's one of the primary ways a woman can get an abortion without having a procedure. It had been approved by the FDA, and a judge who clearly had an agenda ruled that the FDA had not properly approved the drug, and therefore he banned its use.
Had not properly
approved the drug, and therefore he issued a nationwide ban on the medication. And then moments later, a court, I believe, is in Washington, issued a contrary opinions, issuing a nationwide ban preventing the FDA from not, or for pharmacies from and doctors from not giving the medication. So that obviously is going to find its way to the Supreme Court. But I think what the Texas decision reflects is a form of extremism within the Republican Party that they really, on the abortion issue, and that's not to say there are not a bunch of extremists on the Democratic side in terms of abortion on demand, even in some cases, abortion after a baby is born. But let's just focus on the Republican side for a moment. I think anyone who has not read Kimberly Strassel's article, opinion piece from last Friday, April 7th, 2023, on the issue.
In the Wall Street Journal.
In the Wall Street Journal, thank you. Really needs to do it. And this is the point she makes. From a political perspective only, that Republicans will pay the price if they continue to have an uncompromising pro-life agenda, because, this is a quote, it risks riling millions of suburban swing voters who want a middle position. It will guarantee Democrats a powerful issue in 2024, one they're already effectively using to crowd out every other voter concern, the economy, crime, the border, national security. And if history is future, it will cost the GOP seats. Conservatives need to decide if they want GOP majorities that will act common sense protections or Democratic takeovers that will open the abortion floodgates. Basically, her point is, if Democrats win, more babies will be aborted. So Republicans, if you want to win, you have to have a more nuanced approach.
And you'll save babies.
And you'll save more babies. You'll get what you want to achieve. So you have to be a little more open-minded to the pro-choice Republicans, pro-choice independents, and pro-choice Republican suburban women who you cannot win without and who we are alienating. And what I think what makes this particularly sad is that, as a general matter, I think there's somewhat of a consensus in the country on the abortion issue. I think most people reject both extremes. And there's sort of a consensus, not that I've done any empirical study, but just observing, that in the first trimester, it's generally accepted that if a woman wants to have an abortion, whether or not we agree with it or not, okay, she can have the abortion. And that in the third trimester, there's generally accepted at some point the fetus has rights. A third trimester abortion is appalling. We should stop that. But always an exception for the life of the mother, always. And then you have a debate over the second trimester, which science in large part drives viability of the fetus. And we should look at Republicans who may be repulsed by what I'm saying here. Look at Kansas. Kansas is a very red state. They recently had a referendum, standing alone, not having any other election on the ballot. Kansas voted for a pro-choice agenda to allow a woman the right to choose to terminate her pregnancy. Kansas is about as red as you get. Wisconsin, you just had an election in Wisconsin where the Wisconsin Supreme Court was flipped from 3-2 Republican to Democrat to 3-2 Democrat to Republican. And that Supreme Court justice ran on two issues. Every ad she ran was one of two issues. It was either my opponent is extremely pro-life and will not allow an abortion, and my opponent is a MAGA Trump supporter. Those were the two issues in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is not a liberal state. It is still a center-right state. But most importantly for a presidential election, it's a swing state. And if somebody is running for such an important position in the Supreme Court in Wisconsin to flip the Supreme Court, and a progressive liberal wins in Wisconsin on those issues, Republicans really need to wake up and recognize that Trump and the abortion issue are our Achilles heel.
Jesse.
I thought the examples that Eric used were perfect. I think that one of the things that came out of the Supreme Court ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court ruling, is that it's the state's issue. And we've seen states take this issue on and place it on the ballot and decide for themselves, as they should. Kansas being a perfect example. I think the Republican Party needs to have its messaging nuanced better. Its approach has got to be a little bit better where it comes to abortion, or the results will be, if we continue to allow the Democrats to set the narrative, set the messaging, we are going to lead down to the loss of more seats, that Democrats will basically allow unfettered abortion. That means that even kids won't have to get any, parental consent or late-term abortions and so on and so forth. Everything that the base of the party has been looking for will be wiped away because our approach, the Republican Party's approach, has not been nuanced, has not updated its messaging and such. So I believe that, on two things, I believe that Democrats run on two messaging whenever they're in trouble. Messaging is they run a race and they run on abortion, and that seems to be their go-to thing. If you want to say MAGA is the third one, that's fine too. But those two is what I've seen on the streets here in Long Island. And in different parts of the region of Long Island, even more so than others. So I agree. We need to nuance. We need to update our messaging. We need to update our approach on how we address this so we do not open up the floodgates and lose voters that are with us 98% of the time. We don't lose them for the purposes of growing our base, growing our electoral footprint here in our state houses and locally.
Let's switch gears again. Let's talk about what's going on with the nomination by Governor Hochul of the new nominee for Chief Judge, having lost the first round. Now, I'm very troubled by what's going on. I have nothing against the second nominee, even though the judge is known to be a liberal.
Elections have consequences.
And elections have consequences. I'm not troubled by that. What I'm troubled by is the fact that you had a very qualified previous nominee who was zapped with no due process, no fairness. They announced they were voting against him without giving him any kind of examination before voting him down. They packed the state Senate Judiciary Committee, so that it was an outcome that was predetermined. It was an awful, awful discrediting of an independent judiciary. Then what happened? So Hochul takes the name off the list from the independent commission, and what happens there? She picks the liberal. Now, this liberal is very good choice for the progressive wing. They're very happy. They've already announced it's just swell. So now you just have a predetermined announcement now that he's just swell, so he's going to sail through the state Senate and be confirmed. Now, there's another deal being cut, which is Senator Stuart Cousins, who's the majority leader of the state Senate, has announced that she wants to abolish, through a constitutional amendment, the independent screening panel, the Judicial Commission, which comes up with nominees, which was to avoid corruption and patronage and partisanship in the nomination of judges in the highest court of the state. So it's clear that there's a backroom deal going on between Hochul and the state Senate, and they're going to now pack the court with people they want. Who's going to determine who the names are submitted to the governor for her consideration before she submits the name to the Senate for advice and consent? It'll be the state Senate staffers who will do the screening. And who are they in the pocket of? The progressive wing of the Democratic Party. So what you're talking about now is you're talking about the very destruction of an independent judiciary in the state of New York. What does that mean to our listeners? It means whatever radical, violent attack on individual liberties and individual choice comes out of the state legislature, and there's a constitutional challenge to it, you're going to have a packed court that's going to say amen, and they're going to get away with it. There'll be no countervailing force against the tyranny of the faction controlling the state Senate, which is the left-wing progressives. Kevin's giving us a sign for a break. We'll be back with the Let the Record Show in a moment. I'm with Eric Levine, distinguished attorney and political commentator and essayist, and my good friend, co-host, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. We'll be back for the fourth and last segment of Let the Record Show in just a moment.
Let the Record Show is on the air. This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
We're back This is Let the Record Show. I'm just Judge Richard Weinberg with Jesse Garcia, Chair of the Republican Party in Suffolk County, the Vice Chair of the State Republican Party, and with Eric Levine, distinguished attorney, political commentator, and essayist. Jesse, I want to once again change the discussion, and I want to talk to you, Jesse, about Admiral Kirby getting up there and talking about what a great job they did in the Afghanistan withdrawal and patting themselves on the back. I mean, I was deeply troubled and offended by that. What say you, Jesse?
So was I. I mean, anyone to basically stand at that podium and not just, shape a messaging or a narrative, but out now lie about it is just disastrous. All we have to do is go back to the images of that Afghanistan withdrawal, of individual people, citizens, so fearful of their life, they're hanging onto a plane as it's taxiing off their tarmac. The fact that we left billions of dollars and the most technologically savvy military base intact for our enemies to take over, and now China being able to reverse engineer. Millions of dollars of weapons, millions of dollars in ammunition and in equipment. Anybody who looks at that, that chaos that occurred, and the fact that they pulled the military out before they pulled anybody else out, every average American will just look at that and understand that they are being lied to. But then again, you have the mainstream media and big tech, basically becoming partners in this new narrative that the Biden administration is putting forward on the Afghan withdrawal. But the fact of the matter lies. All you have to do, if you're going to look at images of January 6th, look at images of that withdrawal, because that was an utter and complete failure that the consequences are going to be felt for years to come. We have not still faced the full consequences of what we left behind there, how we left behind there, and what is now going to be used against our own forces.
And what it did to me, it was the beginning of the end and the emboldening of our enemy. It's the beginning of the end of the Pax Americana, of the real role of strength of American foreign policy. It was an attack on our national security. It emboldened the axis of evil. These are real consequences because Biden showed that he was weak, he could be played, and the consequences are enormous because the world order is unraveling before our very eyes, and they'll get up there and have Kirby deny that as well. Eric.
I agree with that, Richard, 100%. This really is potentially is the beginning of the end of the American-led world order. But what I found particularly offensive in just a parade of offensive statements was that they blamed Donald Trump. That's the conclusion. This was Trump's fault. Now, why was it Trump's fault? Because he had set this in motion. He signed the Doha Agreement. Well, every other policy that the Biden administration has implemented started from the premise, what did Trump do? We're going to do the opposite. Trump secured the border. We're going to open the border. Trump worked for deregulation. We're going to regulate. Trump cut taxes. We're going to increase taxes. Trump was for entrepreneurship. We're going to be socialists. If they were this notion that they had to do it because Trump did it is just a patent lie. But one thing we know that Trump didn't do, that even they would have to admit, was that during the surrender, the catastrophic surrender and the evacuation, somebody put the Taliban in charge of the security of Karzai Air Force Base where the withdrawal was taking place, where the evacuation was occurring. Somebody put the Taliban in charge of the security of U.S. forces. And as a result of that, 13 service members were murdered in a terrorist attack. Donald Trump didn't give that order. Somebody in the Biden administration gave that order. And what is remarkable is we still do not know who gave that order. That person should be fired and should be publicly humiliated.
Was anyone held to account because of that disastrous withdrawal?
Not a soul. Of course, it goes back to Joe Biden. But that withdrawal, that surrender, was so inept, so chaotic, such a failure, that it directly led to the death of 13 service members. That blood is on Joe Biden's hands.
And Jesse, I want to switch gears once again. Now I want to talk to you about, which I think is absolutely flabbergasting and also enormously dangerous, and once again shows the ineptitude of the Biden administration and the dangers threatening America and the undermining of our relationship with our allies and the emboldenment of our enemies. And that is the leak from the Pentagon of the military plans for the Ukraine, as well as the spying on both our enemies and our friends. What say you, Jesse?
I think this is the worst case since this Eric Snowden case. We've compromised ourselves with our allies. We've compromised ourselves with our foes. We've allowed now a light to be shined on our tactics. This is a complete and utter embarrassment. And based on what I've been reading and what we've been receiving, this seems to have come from a J2 briefing to the Joint Chiefs of Staffs, someone there. And they say they're going to be investigating this, but like we saw in the Supreme Court leaking of that abortion draft memo early in 2022, I don't know if we're ever going to find out. What we do know is that our tactics are now out there for the world to see. Our allies now are questioning us, fortunately, behind closed doors on our tactics in terms of spying on our friends. And what we do know is that our enemies know that we know exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it. And they know how we go about getting that information. If this is a disaster, it's something that, once again, demonstrates the ineptitude of this administration, that they're worried more about other issues like the woke policies and such, instead of defending our national security and also supporting our allies. This is a complete and utter embarrassment for the United States.
This is Let the Record Show. I've been with our esteemed guest, Eric Levine, my very good friend and colleague, Jesse Garcia. Tune in next week for the next episode of Let the Record Show. This is Judge Richard Weinberg signing off by half of my colleagues. Thank you for listening.